Welcome back, Night Dwellers. Tonight, we're diving into the shadows with three chilling tales I found deep within Reddit's darkest corners. Prepare yourself for unsettling encounters, eerie mysteries, and horrors that linger long after the story's end. Turn off the lights, settle in, and let the fear take hold. With story number 1. Hi, I live in a small town in Ireland called Evercrest. Don't try to find it. The government has taken it off the map and removed it from any records. I think they're just gonna abandon us now that it's here. Part of me thinks they always knew it was coming, because our town was always kept away from the other towns and cities in Ireland. Anyway, here's my story. I was in college, and it was mid-May. When I left, I saw three crows pecking at something in the fields. I went over to see what they were pecking at, and found a small white snake-like creature, maybe about 1.5 feet in length. Except it really wasn't a snake at all. It had no arms or legs, but, that's where the similarities end. It had no eyes, ears, nose, nothing. Only a mouth. A big one, too. I chased the crows away from it and lifted it up. It let out a light screech as I did. I said I'd bring him back to my dorm and show him to my science professor tomorrow. So I went to the pet store and got this snake starter kit and assembled it. I put it together and he seemed to really hate the heat lamp, so I turned it off, and he seemed much happier. I decided I ought to feed him. Luckily, the starter kit came with frozen mice, so I thawed one out and gave it to him. He seemed to love it. At this point, it was midnight, so I decided to just go to bed. Unfortunately, he didn't like that idea very much. Between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., he wouldn't stop violently screaming. When I checked on him after he stopped screaming, he had grown legs, 4 of them, and he was also covered in his blood. I, I just decided that he was friendly enough and big enough to free roam my dorm, so that's what I let him do. When I got to my college, I saw the field full of dead crows. I wondered if he had done this as a revenge against them, but I brushed it off. The next few days were relatively normal, with him increasing in size every day. But then one day, I came back from a lecture, and he was acting very aggressively, roaring at me and walking backward when I tried to approach him. He even whipped me with his tail. I also noticed that his skin had turned to dark green color with a red stomach. I left him alone, knowing something was up with him. But then the next morning, I woke up to a massive cocoon in the corner of my kitchen, huge enough for at least 2 or 3 adult humans to fit inside. I left the dorm quickly and went to work. When I got back that evening, the cocoon was shaking and making noise. Later that night, it broke in two, and out walked Crester on 2 legs. He had gone back to his white color and was now 7 feet tall, with very long arms compared to his body. He walked towards me slowly, cornered me in, growled at me, and bared his teeth. I had never been so scared. I thought he would kill me, but then he hopped out of my window and left, breaking it in the process. I went to the bar to try and figure out what happened. I went to the bar to try and forget about the whole thing, as I was utterly traumatized. The next day, I got to my college and saw crowds of students crowding around crime scene tape as my science professor was wheeled out in a bag. Apparently, someone attacked him, ripped him apart. They say it was likely someone he had a debt to, but I know it was Crester getting revenge for the blood test. A few missing person reports later, there is a meeting about him in the town hall. When the police start talking about suspects, Crester bursts in and starts attacking people. The rest is kind of a blur, but I remember screams. Now I'm hiding behind a desk in the town hall. There are bodies and blood everywhere, and Crester is still looking for people. I think he knows I'm here. I'll update this if I can. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but my friend Ben just moved into this old Art Deco apartment building downtown. It's got that vintage charm, peeling wallpaper with faded floral patterns whispering forgotten stories, rickety floorboards that groan under every step like the ghosts of restless tenants, and the pièce de résistance, a creaky elevator that groans more than it glides. It feels like it's on the verge of giving up the ghost with every ascent, its rusty groans echoing through the dusty halls. Yesterday, Ben texted me in a panic. He got stuck in the elevator between floors. Not a big deal, right? Happens to the best of us. But here's the unsettling part. There's a floor 13 that isn't even on the button panel, just a blank space where it should be. A void staring back at you, daring you to push the non-existent button. The elevator lurched to a halt, plunging Ben into the darkness. The old fluorescent lights flickered and died, leaving him with only the faint glow of his phone screen. He fumbled for the call button, but it was unresponsive. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the groaning of the ancient machinery and the frantic thump-thump of his own heart. It felt like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting. Then the elevator jolted again, and the doors clanged open with a sickening screech. No shiny hallway greeted him, just a gaping maw of inky blackness. The air turned thick and stagnant, the silence broken only by a low, rhythmic dripping sound from somewhere unseen. Ben, ever the curious one, and maybe a little foolish, cautiously stepped out, his phone light cutting through the suffocating darkness. The hallway stretched before him, an endless tunnel of peeling wallpaper and chipped linoleum, reeking of mildew and something else, something deeper, something primal. But the most unsettling detail was the faint greenish glow emanating from somewhere down the corridor. It pulsed, rhythmically, like a beating heart, beckoning him forward. He texted me. There's a floor here, but it's not lit. Should I step out? My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed back, urging him to stay put, wait for help. It took ages for him to respond, and when he finally did, his message was chilling. He smiled. His eyes, no eyes, just black holes. Who smiled? I texted back, a cold dread creeping into my gut. The man, on floor 13. He hasn't stopped talking about the smiling man ever since. It's like he's obsessed. He keeps muttering about black eyes and a never-ending smile, a smile that stretched from ear to ear, devoid of warmth, devoid of humanity. The playful, easy-going Ben I know seems to have vanished. I rushed over to his apartment, the silence in the hallway pressing in on me, the creaking floorboards groaning like tortured souls under my feet. Ben answered the door, but it it wasn't Ben. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were vacant, his face an emotionless mask. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over and over again in a monotone voice. The smiling man. He waits for you on floor 13. Panic clawed at my throat. I called the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing unusual, no hidden floor, and no trace of anything amiss. They think Ben's stressed, overworked, maybe even hallucinating, but I know better. Ben's locked himself in his apartment, refusing to come out. He keeps drawing the same thing over and over on scraps of paper, a wide, toothy grin with empty black sockets for eyes. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a faint, rhythmic dripping sound coming from his apartment, a sound that chills me to the bone. I'm worried sick. Did something happen to him on floor 13? What if the smiling man got to him somehow, and now the once familiar glint in Ben's eyes seems replaced by a hollow darkness mirroring the black holes he described? Is Ben lost forever to the horrors of floor 13? And the most terrifying part? The blank space where the floor 13 button should be. Uh, it's no longer blank. When I came home from work on Friday, I did what I always do. I grabbed some snacks and then plopped down in front of my laptop to write a new scary story to share on Reddit. Writing was my hobby and my passion. I was especially intrigued by vampires, werewolves, and other monsters. Creating these stories kept me sane while I worked 8 hours a day as a garbage man. So when I found out 3 days later that a scammy YouTuber had stolen my work, presenting it with a low-quality voiceover on his channel, I lost it. The guy who went by the name Scary Eddie made thousands of dollars every month with other people's work. All the while, I had to work myself to death out there. It wasn't fair. I devised a plan to take revenge. First, I sent the guy an email, introducing myself as a sponsor interested in advertising on his channel. That's how I got his real name and phone number. Finding out where he lived was easy after that. Unfortunately for Edward Johnson, aka Scary Eddie, he was renting an apartment in Chicago, same as me. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I called my uncle Sven. Sven's first name might sound like he's a part-time worker at IKEA, but he's the real deal. Uncle Sven is an old-school Viking. Blood for blood, eye for an eye, all of that. And he loved to fight. Since there were no battlefields around anymore on US ground where he could wield an axe, berserker style, he had joined the army when he was just 18. He had worked his way up in record time. These days, Sven worked as an independent contractor for the CIA, doing God knows what all over the world. Our family didn't ask, he didn't tell. That was the deal. I met with Sven in a pub downtown. At first, he wasn't interested. He told me to let it go and not waste his time with my nonsense. But it all changed when we left later that night. We were both pretty wasted. While we were waiting for an Uber, I looked up and saw the moon was almost full. I pointed it out to Sven and explained that this was the best time to write a new werewolf story. Uncle Sven looked at me with a puzzled expression. Then he threw his head back and started laughing manically. He even let out a wolf's howl. When I asked him about his strange outburst, he wiped tears of laughter from his eyes and told me he had reconsidered. Tomorrow he would pay a visit to Scary Eddie to give him a good scare. I was happy Sven took me seriously, but I was also a bit nervous. The next evening, Sven picked me up at home. He had 2 of his military buddies with him, both Norwegian guys. I asked why he needed extra muscle to scold a dopey YouTuber, but Sven just laughed and explained that Gunnar and Felix were with us to make sure he wouldn't go too far. I believed him. At the end of the day, he was a paid killer for the government. I wanted to tell Eddie to leave my stories alone. I didn't want Sven to deploy advanced interrogation tactics, as the CIA called it. It might be smart to have some level-headed guys with us. Then the mayhem started. Eddie wasn't amused to see some shady-looking strangers at his door, and Sven didn't hesitate. He punched the little guy out. Gunnar and Felix put a black hood over his head and dragged him unconscious to the car. I lost it. I screamed at Sven, asking him what he was doing and demanded he stop. He calmly told me to shut up and pay attention. The look in his eyes was unsettling, at best, and I didn't dare to speak up anymore. We drove for hours until we reached a remote park with big trees and thick bushes. No one was there but us. Sven's friends dragged Eddie through the undergrowth. The terrified YouTuber was awake and begged for mercy. He pleaded with me to let him go, but Sven told him that thieves had to pay. The full moon smiled down on us in an almost shocking manner. We reached a small clearing where a woman I didn't know was keeping a bonfire going. She was dressed in robes engraved with ancient Nordic runes. I understood that Sven had prepared this place. Horrified, I asked him what we were doing here, but my uncle just explained that tonight we would honor the old laws. Gunnar, Felix, and Sven brought out antlers and animal bones. They put on war paint while humming an old Norse battle hymn. All the while, Eddie was kneeling in the dirt, crying and begging. Then I understood. I was nerd enough to know about our ancestors and about Viking rituals. My uncle and his friends were preparing a sacrifice. I tried to get Eddie to his feet so we could run away, but Sven knocked me down. He looked at me sternly and commanded me to honor our, our gods. This was Hell's night, and she would get her tribute. The strange woman was clearly a priestess of the old ways. She chanted sinister rhymes and danced around us. When midnight was upon us, I lost my mind. All of a sudden, the fire exploded with sparks, and a horrific voice came out of the flames. It asked for the sacrifice it was owed. Sven, Gunnar, Felix, and the priestess bowed their heads. Sven pointed to Eddie and told Hel that this unworthy thief was hers to take. I thought I was in a nightmare, but it was all too real. Roots shot out from the ground and wrapped around Eddie's torso, neck, and arms. The poor man struggled, but he couldn't get away. Slowly, he was dragged into the ground. My uncle and his friends had started chanting again. Then he was gone. All that was left was a black circle in the earth. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, I wanted to run away. But all I could do was sit in the wet grass and stare in horror into the flames. I must have passed out because I woke up in my own bed the next day. Sven was in my apartment making me tea. When I felt strong enough to get up, he sat me down and explained that he was a part of a community praying to the Norse gods, and that they were real. He offered to introduce me to the priestess, but I told him to stay away from me. He nodded and told me I could come to him when I was ready. Ever since that horrific night, I have disturbing visions. Me as a wolf running through a dark forest, hunting my prey. Me as a berserk warrior cutting through the ranks of my enemies. Me as a raven laying curses on evildoers and cowards. I understand that the North is in my blood. I can hear Odin calling my name. But I'm human, and I have free will, so I choose the life of a pacifist. And why wouldn't I? After that day, not one YouTuber dared to steal one of my stories ever again.